The village woke each morning like a watchful eye, its red earth paths humming with the rhythm of life. Smoke curled from clay stoves as children laughed near the wells, and the wind whispered through the baobab trees, carrying stories of ancestors who had seen joy and sorrow alike. Every gesture, every glance, every footstep mattered here. A person could not move without the village knowing, for the elders' eyes were never blind, and their silence spoke louder than words. In a modest home beneath the shade of mango trees, a woman moved with quiet grace. Her hands were gentle, tending the cooking fires, sweeping the dusted floors, and arranging the herbs she had grown with care. She was known by all, kind, patient, and generous to neighbors and strangers alike, but behind her soft smile, her heart carried burdens the village did not see. Each morning, she rose before the sun to keep the home in order, hiding the loneliness that clung to her like the morning mist. "May peace guide this house," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, though no one heard. Her husband, once a man of humility and laughter, had changed. Wealth and status had wrapped around him like the finest cloth, but the fabric was stitched with pride. He walked through the village with his head held high, his words sharp, his patience thin. The same hands that once lifted his wife's spirits now rested only on ledgers and accounts, his gaze more often turned to outsiders than to the home he had built. The village noticed the shift, murmuring softly, "He has forgotten the river that once flowed through his heart." Then came a stranger, bold as the sun at midday. She entered the village with eyes that did not bow to tradition and a voice that carried confidence like a drumbeat. Her laughter rang through the dusty paths, and her presence stirred whispers among the women who gathered at the wells. She spoke freely, moving with a pride that unsettled the quiet harmony of the village, ignoring the small customs and courtesies that bound the community together. "I come as I am," she said, smiling, "and none shall change me." In the household, tension grew like weeds in a garden left untended. Where once there had been warmth, now silence lay thick between husband and wife. Conversations were measured, meals eaten in quiet, and eyes averted. The wife felt the cold walls of emotional distance pressing against her, a gap too wide to bridge with mere words. Yet she did not speak of her pain, for to do so would challenge the codes that governed home and honor alike. Beneath the baobab tree at the village center, neighbors gathered, their voices hushed and careful. They felt the unease, sensed the betrayal hidden behind polite nods and forced smiles. Yet the elders remained silent, their experience teaching them patience. Words were weighed like gold, and sometimes silence was the greatest judgment of all. The women whispered gently, "She carries sorrow no one dares name," but none dared step beyond cultural bounds to speak openly. One day, an announcement spread like fire through dry grass. The family would host a grand feast. A gathering of kin, of elders, of respected neighbors, all would witness the house's honor and standing. The wife's heart tightened, knowing the feast would bring together not only celebration but the scrutiny of every eye. Each guest's arrival was another thread in the tapestry of observation, each smile another measure of her dignity. The elders arrived first, their footsteps slow and deliberate, each gesture carrying meaning. They settled beneath the shade of the village's oldest baobab, watching the household with eyes that had seen decades of joy and deceit alike. Their nods and whispers were subtle, yet heavy with expectation. "This house," an elder murmured, "will show whether it holds respect or hides shame." And in the quiet of that day, as sunlight spilled over the red earth, the stage was set, every glance, every movement, every secret waiting to unfold beneath the watchful eyes of the village. The long wooden table gleamed under the flickering lanterns, laden with dishes prepared with care and love. The wife moved gracefully between the serving platters, her hands steady, her face wearing a calm smile. Yet beneath that gentle expression, her heart quivered like a leaf caught in a sudden wind. She set down a bowl of steaming stew, adjusting the napkins just so, all the while feeling the weight of countless unspoken words pressing upon her chest. "Here, father, the stew is just as you like it," she said softly, voice smooth as the river stones, hiding the tremor she felt inside. She bowed slightly, hoping no one would notice the quiver in her hands. The murmurs of guests filled the hall, polite greetings mingling with the soft clinking of spoons on bowls. Her husband's absence was a shadow she felt with every step. Then, the heavy wooden door creaked, and the chatter faltered as a figure appeared in the doorway. He stepped in, head high, and beside him walked a woman whose presence drew every eye like fire to dry grass. The mistress, clad in bright silks that clashed with the muted colors of the gathering, smiled confidently as she glanced around the room. Her laughter was soft but cutting, echoing off the walls. A hush fell, heavy as the first rains of the season. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Elders leaned back in their chairs, brows furrowed. No one dared to speak. The air thickened, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for what was to come. The wife froze in place, the bowl of soup balanced carefully in her hands. She could feel the heat of it not just on the porcelain, but rising like a warning through her own chest. Her pulse quickened, the shadows of the lantern flickering across her face as she caught sight of the mistress's eyes, sharp, unyielding, and calculating. A subtle fire began to burn beneath the calm faces around her. Guests shifted uneasily, aware that an unseen tension now governed the room. Their polite smiles were brittle shields against the storm building within these walls. She felt it then, the wind of trouble, sweeping through the gathering like a whisper from the ancestors. It pressed against her, cold and insistent, stirring memories of warnings long ignored. The eyes of the village see all. No deceit hides forever. Steam rose from the bowls on the table, curling into the tense air like smoke from a ceremonial fire. The scent of the stew, once comforting, now seemed ominous. The flickering light reflected off the polished wood, creating restless shadows that danced across the walls. Each ripple of heat, each small movement in the room, hinted that fate was ready to speak. The wife's hands tightened around the bowl, her calm exterior betraying the storm building within her heart. "Something is coming," she whispered to herself, though no one could hear. The room held its breath, and even the elder's eyes, usually steady and unblinking, seemed to flicker with unease. The moment stretched, pregnant with possibility, the air alive with the unspoken knowledge that tradition, honor, and betrayal were about to collide. The first tremor of what was to come moved through the hall like the first strike of lightning on a darkened plain. And the wife, poised yet trembling, knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The elders gathered beneath the great baobab tree, their walking sticks firm against the red earth ground, robes rustling softly as they settled into the circle. Their eyes, deep with years of seeing, swept across the courtyard, taking in faces young and old. With voices calm yet heavy with authority, they offered blessings to the house and those within. "May this gathering be filled with peace," intoned the eldest, his voice carrying like wind over the plains. "May our ancestors guide our hearts, and may honor and respect dwell in this home." The words were like a drumbeat, calling for unity, though none could yet sense the storm brewing beneath the surface. Inside the house, the wife moved with quiet precision. She carried bowls of steaming stew and plates of fufu, her hands steady, her back straight, her face calm. "This will warm them all," she whispered to herself as she placed a dish before her father-in-law. She bowed slightly, hiding the ache behind her gentle smile. Every gesture, every careful step, was a performance of honor, masking the tempest in her heart. Then the door swung open. The chatter of polite greetings faltered as a woman entered, a stranger from a distant town, her eyes sharp, her step confident. She did not bow, she did not greet the elders with the customary words. Her bright cloths clashed with the muted tones of the gathering, drawing every eye toward her. "She comes as if she owns the wind," muttered a cousin under his breath. The mistress' lips curled in a quiet, knowing smile as she scanned the room. Her gestures, subtle and deliberate, seemed to mock the careful order of the household. She laughed softly at a clumsy bow, rolled her eyes at the wife's polite attentions, and rested a hand upon the arm of the husband as if claiming territory. The villagers noticed, though none spoke aloud. At first, it was the smallest things: a dismissive glance, a tilt of the head, a finger flicked carelessly at the napkin on the table. But the wife felt each one like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through her composure. The insults grew bolder, moving from whispers to visible defiance. The mistress shifted her seat closer to the elders, leaning back, as if daring anyone to correct her. "And the husband?" He laughed. A low, pleased chuckle that rattled the walls of the home. "She has spirit, doesn't she?" he said, loud enough for the wife to hear. Every laugh, every approving glance, burned like fire against the careful order she had tried to maintain. The wife's heart sank as she served dish after dish, realizing her place had been reduced. She, who had built this house with love, who had sustained him through every hardship, now moved like a shadow among the very walls she had kept warm. The husband's eyes no longer sought hers with affection. His voice no longer spoke encouragement, only amusement at the chaos brought by the bold stranger. Pride had blinded him, and the villagers saw it. A man who had once understood loyalty now laughing at its destruction. Every gesture he made, every word he spoke, revealed a man who had lost his way, forgetting the river of tradition that once guided him. The elders exchanged glances, their silence heavy, knowing the house they blessed was now a stage for betrayal. And yet, the wife continued her work, her face calm, her hand steady, waiting for what fate had long prepared to strike. The wife stood by the table, her hand steady, her back straight, but her heart felt like it had been weighed with stones. Each movement, each careful placement of a dish, was a performance of dignity. She wanted to scream, to pour out the grief that burned in her chest, but she held her silence as a shield. "I must not falter," she whispered to herself, a single bead of sweat tracing her temple. Memories rose unbidden, like smoke from a long-forgotten fire. She remembered the nights she had labored, tending the home while he slept. She remembered the sacrifices she had made, the meals skipped so he could eat, the smiles she offered when her own heart ached. Every quiet effort, every hidden tear, all had built the foundation of the life they shared. And now, in the presence of the woman who walked into their home uninvited, her loyalty seemed invisible, her endurance meaningless. Even the elders sensed it. Though she spoke not a word of complaint, the weight of her suffering filled the room. Eyes followed her as she moved, catching the subtle tremor in her hands, the slight falter in her step. The air was thick with unspoken grief. A heavy silence settled, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see whether honor or humiliation would prevail. She lifted the steaming bowl, the aroma rising in curls that mingled with the tension in the air. Her hands did not shake, her expression remained calm, yet inside, a storm raged. The mistress' gaze met hers, sharp and deliberate. "You serve well for someone who hides behind old customs," she said, her words cutting through the air like a spear. The implication was clear. The wife's patience was weakness, her tradition outdated. The wife's lips remained sealed, but her chest tightened, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She placed the bowl before the bold woman, careful not to spill a drop. The soup, once a symbol of nourishment and care, now felt like fire, echoing the heat of her humiliation. Each steam curl that rose from the bowl seemed to mirror the heat building within her, the quiet fury of a heart wounded yet controlled. Around her, the guests shifted uneasily, sensing the invisible battle. The husband chuckled quietly, oblivious to the storm in his wife's soul, encouraging the mistress' subtle jabs with approving glances. But she, calm and composed outwardly, carried in her heart a fire that no laughter could extinguish, a strength that tradition had taught her to wield quietly, until the right moment came to speak the truth of her pain. The room seemed to hold its breath as the mistress leaned forward, her hand gripping the bowl with cruel intent. In one swift motion, the steaming soup tipped from the rim, cascading down over the wife's shoulders, soaking her dress and scalding her skin. The heat seared not only her body but the pride she had carried for years, carefully wrapped in patience and grace. Her gasp of shock was swallowed by the stunned silence of the hall. Time slowed. The clatter of spoons, the soft rustle of cloth, even the whisper of the wind through the open windows, all paused. Eyes widened in disbelief, mouths remained half open, and not a single voice dared break the oppressive quiet. The sacred gathering, meant for blessing and unity, had been turned into a stage of humiliation. The wife's hands trembled as she pressed a cloth to her burning skin, her face pale but composed. She looked toward her husband, expecting at least a flicker of shame or concern, but his expression was unmoved. His words came, deliberate and cold. "You deserved it." The weight of those syllables pressed heavier than the scalding liquid that dripped from her sleeves. Pain lanced through her body, but it was nothing compared to the shattering of her heart. The love that had once been a quiet river between them now evaporated, leaving only betrayal to claim its throne. The elders shifted in their seats, their walking sticks tapping lightly against the floor as if to measure the room's moral imbalance. Their faces were solemn, etched with the lines of 100 years' wisdom, yet even they hesitated. Authority demanded action, yet tradition restrained them. The silence of respect clashed with the call of justice. Family members clenched their fists beneath the table, jaws tight, eyes blazing with anger. Yet fear held them prisoner. No one dared challenge the husband directly, for in this village, disrespect toward a man of status carried consequences. The unspoken tension pressed upon the gathering like a heavy cloth, suffocating and relentless. The elder's gaze met the wife's, fleetingly acknowledging her pain. Her suffering was clear to all, yet the invisible chains of culture and respect bound every voice. Every witness felt the truth. Honor had been violated, dignity burned, and the sacred bond between husband and wife desecrated before both kin and ancestors. The room held its breath, balancing between the rules of respect and the call of truth. The fire of humiliation and betrayal smoldered in every heart, and yet no one dared to speak aloud. The wife, drenched and trembling, stood with her head held high, embodying both the suffering and the unyielding strength that tradition and patience had taught her. The weight of culture, of silence, and of observation pressed down, marking a moment that would echo across the village for generations. The wife stood still, the heat of the soup lingering on her skin, yet her body no longer trembled with fear. Pain burned, but her face betrayed nothing. Her eyes, steady and unwavering, held the quiet strength of the rivers that had carried her ancestors for centuries. She would not break. She would not cry. She would not give the mistress the satisfaction of seeing her fall. She stepped away from the table, each footfall measured, deliberate, as though marking a path of dignity through the ashes of humiliation. No words were spoken, yet every silent motion carried more weight than 1,000 angry voices. The crowd, previously frozen, felt the power in her calm retreat. Even the youngest children sensed that something sacred had been witnessed, strength disguised as silence, wisdom cloaked in restraint. Her gaze lifted to the ceiling, where the beams held the watchful eyes of ancestors long gone. In that moment, the quiet fire of her composure seemed to speak to them, calling upon the spirits who had guided the village for generations. She carried not only her pain, but the memory of all who had suffered silently before her, a living testament to endurance. From the corner of the room, a respected elder, whose years had taught him to read hearts better than words, leaned forward. His eyes softened, keen with understanding. "There is more to this woman than even the proudest man in this house perceives," he murmured under his breath, almost to himself, yet loud enough for a few nearby to hear. A subtle truth lingered in the air, a story, hidden and yet to be revealed, that would change the course of this gathering. The atmosphere shifted. The bright silks of the mistress now seemed less commanding, her audacity dwarfed by the silent power of the wife. Whispers passed among family members, eyes darting from the husband to the woman who had endured so much and yet remained unbroken. The air itself seemed charged with the weight of expectation. The feast, meant for laughter and celebration, had transformed. Plates were still warm, food untouched, but the spirit of the gathering had changed. Eyes no longer looked merely for pleasure, they sought truth. The elders rose from their seats with the gravity of baobab trees, their presence demanding respect. Their hands rested on staffs that had seen a century of justice, their voices ready to speak on behalf of the violated honor before them. At last, tradition spoke louder than fear. "Enough," intoned the eldest, his voice low but resonant, carrying across the hall. "No act done in this house can remain hidden from the eyes of ancestors, nor from the balance of our hearts. Respect must be restored, and justice served." Hesitation melted under the weight of moral law. Fear gave way to the truth. The silence that had protected pride now crumbled, leaving only the power of courage, wisdom, and ancestral guidance to illuminate the path forward. In that moment, the wife's composure became more than survival. It became the spark that would ignite accountability, the embodiment of dignity that even the proudest man could not ignore. The hall, once a place of celebration, now held the presence of history, of morality, and of justice, awaiting the reckoning that was to come. The air in the hall felt electric, as though the spirits themselves had leaned closer to listen. The long-kept truth stirred, timid at first, like the first drops of rain on a parched land. Whispers rippled through the room, carried not by the wind, but by the weight of what was about to be known. Eyes shifted, glances met, and hearts began to beat with anticipation, for the veil of secrecy was lifting. "She has carried more than you will ever see," the elder murmured, his voice steady, yet cutting through the silence like a drum in the night. "She fed the fire of your rise while hiding her own wounds." The wife, once quiet and yielding, now became the heart of the room. Her sacrifices, nights spent weaving dreams into his ambitions, meals skipped to fill his plate, the silent prayers whispered for his success, were spoken aloud, as if the ancestors themselves had lent their voices. Murmurs of recognition traveled among the gathered family, eyes widening as respect for her strength blossomed. And then the hidden roots revealed themselves. Her lineage, once unspoken, now demanded acknowledgment. She was born of a family whose counsel had shaped councils, whose honor had guided villages, and whose wisdom was sought by chiefs and elders alike. The walls themselves seemed to hum with her authority, as if history had leaned in to nod approval. The room shuddered, as though thunder had split the sky above. Truth, once buried under pride and neglect, now crashed into the gathering with the weight of inevitability. Every face reflected astonishment. Even the children, young and impressionable, felt the tremor of respect for the woman who had endured in silence. The husband's eyes widened as he finally glimpsed the reflection of his own failures. The man he had believed himself to be, confident, dominant, untouchable, stood revealed as small, ungrateful, and blind to the foundation beneath his wealth and power. His hands trembled slightly on the table, the color drained from his face. Pride, that brittle shield he had worn for so long, crumbled like dry earth beneath the first rain. Shame seeped into his chest, replacing the arrogance that had guided him for years. He looked at the wife he had scorned and realized, too late, the honor he had destroyed and the love he had betrayed. The mistress, who had entered the house with boldness and audacity, now faltered. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, faltered into silence. She sensed the tide had turned, the power she thought she held slipping like sand through trembling fingers. Fear darkened her eyes as the true weight of lineage, loyalty, and righteousness settled over the gathering. In that hall, the scales of honor shifted. The wife, long overlooked and underestimated, stood at the center, not as a victim, but as the keeper of truth, strength, and justice. The air still vibrated with the echo of revelation, and every soul in the room knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The mistress' smile faltered as the elder's sharp eyes swept over her. The boldness that had carried her into the house now seemed hollow, a mask slipping from a face unprepared for truth. Every gesture she had used to mock, every glance meant to belittle, now revealed the greed and disrespect that had guided her steps. She was seen for what she truly was, and the air in the hall seemed to thicken with the weight of judgment. The wife stood tall, her hands still steady despite the heat that had kissed her skin moments ago. Then, softly at first, and yet with a resonance that filled the hall, she spoke. "I have carried this house, these hearts, and these dreams quietly," she said, her voice calm, measured, yet heavy with generations of strength. "I have loved and sacrificed without seeking recognition, not for myself, but for the family and the honor we were all meant to uphold." Her words, clear and unwavering, pierced through the tension. They healed the hearts of those who had doubted her resilience, while striking at the heart of those who had sought to harm her. There was no anger, no venom, only truth spoken with courage and dignity. The room felt the weight of every silent night she had endured, every unseen effort she had poured into the life she shared with her husband. She paused, letting her presence speak before continuing. "I do not seek revenge. The truth alone is justice. Let it stand." Silence followed, thick and reverent, as her words echoed in the hall. Even the children, wide-eyed, felt the magnitude of her integrity. In that moment, she did not need to raise her voice or strike back. Truth had carried the force of righteousness. The elders, once hesitant, leaned forward, their authority filling the space like the roots of a great tree. "The man who dishonors his own house dishonors the spirits that watch over us," one elder intoned. "We have seen his pride, his betrayal, and the pain he has caused. The balance must be restored, and the lesson must be remembered." Their judgment fell not with anger, but with the weight of tradition and fairness. The husband lowered his gaze, his confidence shattered, the mantle of pride that had once cloaked him now crumbling. Shame wrapped around him as surely as fire consumes dry grass, leaving him stripped before his family and ancestors. Every smile that had once warmed him now reflected only the consequence of his choices. The soup that had burned her moments before now symbolized something more profound. Fire had revealed the truth. The act meant to harm became the very instrument through which lies were exposed, deceit laid bare, and justice ignited. What was intended to destroy became a torch, lighting the path of clarity for all present. From the ashes of humiliation and pain came understanding. The wife's dignity shone brighter than ever, the mistress' cunning unraveled, and the husband's lesson was seared into the memory of every witness. In the quiet after the storm, it was clear. The truth had spoken, and it would endure, stronger than any greed, stronger than any betrayal, stronger than fear itself. The husband slumped into his chair, the weight of his own shame pressing against his chest like a stone he could not lift. The laughter that had once followed him now abandoned the room, leaving only echoes of regret bouncing off the walls. He touched his face, feeling the sting of humiliation not just from his wife, but from the ancestors who had watched silently, their judgment heavy in the still air. Pride, once a cloak, now lay in tatters at his feet. The mistress, whose entrance had sparked fire and discord, now stood alone. No hand reached for her, no voice defended her, and the warmth she had carried like a torch was snuffed by the cold silence of rejection. She turned, seeking support in eyes that refused her, and found only the firm, silent disapproval of the community. Her boldness faltered, replaced by fear, as she realized that power taken without honor is never safe. The wife stepped forward, her posture straight, her eyes calm but bright with quiet determination. She paused, feeling the weight of every whispered insult, every hidden trial, every moment of endurance. The crossroads lay before her, forgiveness or departure, comfort in complacency or courage in independence. She inhaled deeply, letting the scent of earth and fire settle in her senses. "I will walk my path as I choose," she said softly, her voice carrying across the hall. "I owe no one my suffering, but I owe myself dignity." Her words were neither boastful nor bitter. They were steady, rooted in the strength of generations of women who had faced storms and walked on, leaving footprints for others to follow. The elders stirred, leaning on canes, their eyes keen and discerning. One of them spoke, voice low but firm. "Balance must return. The wrongs have been seen. Let the young remember that honor is not in wealth, nor fear, but in respect for one another." Others nodded, adding their counsel, weaving guidance like threads into the fabric of the village. The husband's gaze fell to the floor. He felt the hollowness of his riches, the emptiness of pride, and the irreplaceable loss of trust and honor. "I have learned what cannot be bought," he whispered, a man diminished yet awakened to truth. The wife turned, her steps measured and sure, and walked into the light that spilled through the doorway. She emerged from pain like the sun breaking through a storm, casting warmth and clarity across the dusty paths of the village. Neighbors watched quietly, understanding that strength need not shout, it could rise in silence, in integrity, in unwavering grace. The village breathed again. Markets hummed, children played, and elders shared the story beneath the baobab trees. The fire that once burned became a glowing memory of wisdom, a story to guide those who came after. Whispers carried tales of betrayal, truth, and resilience, lessons passed from one generation to the next, reminding all who listened, betrayal walks with consequences, patience and truth hold power, and where respect lives, harmony follows like rain after drought.